Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute here as folks join us. Just waiting a few more moments for folks to join. Okay. I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mina Nutbeam. I'm the program manager for the CORES program at SAHF, also known as Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future. If you are less familiar with CORES, CORES is a certification that recognizes owner-operators and third-party providers that have developed a robust commitment, capacity, and competency in providing resident services coordination in affordable rental homes. In today's webinar, we are going to be exploring commonly used data systems to support your organization's efforts to track and understand the impact of your programs and services. Next slide here. So before we get started, we just wanted to go over some logistical items for today. So feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself and share resources in the chat. Today's recording and slides will also be made available to folks after today's webinar, as well as any resources that we mention and links that we share. So again, please use the chat for any resources or to introduce yourself. And then the Q&A function will be open as well, and we ask that you use that for any questions that you have that we'll be answering, I should say, in our discussion portion after today's presenters and panelists. So just before we get started, as part of a system of resident services coordination, it's really important to have systems in place to track and understand resident services impact. As resident services providers expand their programs and services, using a data system is key to coordinating, quantifying, and evaluating the impact of your programs. However, the landscape of available data systems and technology to help track resident services is ever changing, which can make it difficult to answer the question of what data system is best for meeting your organization's unique needs. We know that there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and in 2020, SAFE developed a list of considerations when selecting a data system and information on some of the most commonly used resident services data systems that are leveraged by both core certified organizations and the SAFE members. To keep pace with this changing landscape, in November 2024, SAFE actually updated this guide to provide a starting place for those interested in investigating a data system and investing in one for the first time, or finding a system that better aligns with their current programs and future growth. So with that, in today's webinar, we will be hearing about SAFE's updated guide on commonly used resident services data systems and hear from practitioners at 3 core certified organizations: True Ground Housing Partners, Preservation of Affordable Housing, and National Housing Trust. And they're going to be talking about some of the data systems they've used and their experiences. Before we get started, we wanted to hear from you about what data systems you are currently using. So in a moment here, we're going to open a poll. Oh, thank you. So what we want to ask is what resident services tracking data systems you are currently using. And here's a list of them here. So go ahead and take a moment to respond to this poll. It looks like so far we have quite a variety here. I'll give it a few more seconds before we end the poll. Okay, I think we can go ahead and end the poll. So it looks like here we have quite a variety. A lot of folks are using Excel or other types of spreadsheets to track resident services data. We also have a number of folks who said they use Apricot 360, Family Metrics, Salesforce, some other folks using Yardi Case Manager, and a smaller number of folks using Ask Online as well. And looks like some folks are using success measures, as well as a number of folks who said they're using other data systems. So I'd love to hear what other data systems you're using, if you want to include those in our chat too. Great. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Nicole Manchester, who is the Director of Data and Analytics at Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future. She's going to be talking about a number of resources, which I alluded to earlier, and we're really excited to have her today. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Mina. Thanks for having me for today's webinar. So you can advance. So just to kick us off, I'm sure most of you know that CORS is operated by Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, or SAHF, but just really quickly, if anyone here is unfamiliar with our organization, who is SAHF? Who are we? We're a mission-driven collaborative of nonprofit housing providers. Our mission is to advance the creation and preservation of healthy, sustainable, affordable rental homes so every person has a home in a flourishing community. And so some brief stats about our organization. We're a network of 12 nonprofit affordable housing providers who own over 150,000 rental units. Thanks, Mina. There's our website there in the chat. We house families, seniors, special needs populations, SAFE members operating in 49 states across the country, and working toward our vision of creating more healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. And so we can advance to the next slide. And so SAFE has a really deep bodied work around resident health and working towards resident outcomes. SAFE members are committed to the idea that quality, affordable rental housing can be a platform to opportunity. They're among the national leaders in service-enriched housing, providing a range of community supports and opportunities for residents. So how we do this work is we have a few buckets of work that how we different approaches. We work toward a systems approach or a portfolio level approach to providing resident-centered programs and services. So thinking of all of the things that roll up into that systems approach. We work with our members and partners to think about how to measure outcomes and identify impactful programs for residents. And then, of course, lastly, we have our course program, which is very much influenced by the systems approach work and the measuring outcomes work. And next slide. So we're very excited. We just published 2 new resources in the last month or so. And so we're excited to share them with you, and we hope they'll be helpful for folks. And they're available on our website. We'll share the links to both of them. So we have this commonly used data systems memo, thanks Mina, that we'll talk more about that. Yeah, so I'll get more into that. And then we also have a program classification framework that we published as well. So I'll talk more about both of these. So commonly used data systems memo. So what was the driver behind this? So we heard from our members and other partners that many organizations, over the last decade or more, have wanted to develop more impactful, more robust resident services programs. And as part of that, they wanted to level up their tracking systems for resident services, or they wanted to invest in a new data system, and weren't sure where to start, needed guidance or support. I mean, this is a big decision to invest in a data system. And so, are there tools available to help them think through that process? So we originally created this memo in 2020. And a lot has changed in the last 4 years, and so wanted to update it a bit and refresh it. And so we gathered information and did some fact finding this past fall, and just published an updated version a few weeks ago. And so what this memo or resource includes is There's a few sections. There's a section around considerations that organizations should think about when they're investing in a data system, all of the kind of pieces that go into that decision. And then kind of the meat of the resource is a list of what we have heard to be the most commonly used data systems in the field, and some details around what we've heard to be their strengths and limitations, costs, and some other features. So I can go more into that. Next slide. So this is kind of a brief version of what we have in the memo, but to give an example of what's in there. So a few things the organization should think about, some considerations for investing in a data system for resident services, whether it's tracking inputs or outcomes or anything around resident services. So of course, cost is a big piece, particularly for nonprofits. You might have a limited budget, so thinking about kind of your per user costs, but then also, costs associated with consultants or customization, training. Do you need additional staff to support the data system? Everything that rolls into that. The user experience, particularly the frontline staff experience, is so important. How user-friendly is it for staff to input data, then, of course, other users as well. Collaboration and supervisor experience, the extent to which the data system supports collaboration across teams, across departments, enable supervisors to review or approve work, or data entered by frontline staff, some of those workflow processes. The next item, dashboard functionality. So does the system allow for the creation of dashboards that aggregate data together that allow frontline or other staff to see kind of overall statistics or data about their properties, and perhaps allows you to interact with dashboards as well. Data volume and security. So like how much data are you gonna have to put into the system? Is there any additional security you might need? For example, do you have to think about like HIPAA compliance for your data? Are there any related issues to that? Customization, the extent to which you're thinking about how you want to customize this platform to tailor it to your needs, and everything that is associated with that, costs and staff and whatnot that you might need to help with customization. Reporting capabilities. So what reports come with the data system? Will you need to create custom reports, like design your own reports? How easy is it to create custom reports? That sort of thing. And then lastly, another key piece is integration with other software, other data systems you might have in your organization, say asset management or HR, or particularly property management software like Yardi or RealPage. We've heard that it's can make the work a lot, across your organization a lot easier if you can more easily integrate resident services and a property management data system, so data kind of flows from one to the other. And of course, there's other considerations as well. This is just kind of the key items that we think of. Next slide. So another key piece of this resource that we wanted to highlight, and this is in the memo, so you can, and I know the text is really small on this slide, so you can find this and zoom in more in the memo or resource guide itself. But basically, this is a chart that details what we have heard to be the most commonly used data systems for resident services in affordable housing. So we list Ask Online, Family Metrics, Apricot/Apricot 360, Salesforce, Success Measures data system, which is affiliated with NeighborWorks, and Yardi's Case Manager module. And so for each of these, we provide some information around some strengths, some limitations, and this is all of some information we've gathered from our members and partners, just what we have heard through some of our relationships of how organizations have used these systems. So strengths, limitations, some approximations on cost. And I will say for the cost column in the memo, after this grid, we have more details around cost as well and provide some ranges. Of course, with the caveat that many of these companies, the cost is dependent on a variety of factors and the size of our organization and all that. So this is very approximate estimations of cost, just to kind of give you a rough sense. And then some other factors here, like does it integrate with HUD standards for success? Does it have dashboard and reporting capabilities and that sort of thing? So hopefully this is some helpful information in here for folks. And I think this is my last slide on the data systems memo, but yeah, just to recap, we hope this is a resource for organizations that are thinking about investing in a data system, and we're gonna have Selena and Brian and Abby talk some more about how their organizations are using Apricot and Salesforce, just for examples, and hope to update this perhaps in future years, and if there's new data systems coming online or changes, they're always being changed. So we hope to kind of keep this alive and refreshed periodically. So next slide. So the other tool that we're excited to share with you all that's on the SAHF website is this program classification framework. So we had some support from the Wells Fargo Foundation to put this together. So very appreciative of that funding. So the impetus behind this resource was that we had heard from organizations that they'd have challenges around creating consistency in how they tracked programs and services in their data systems that were offered to residents. For example, service coordinators inputting in that they are providing community building programs, say, to residents. Well, this could run the gamut from, you might call it, holiday programs, community dinners, community suppers, holiday mixers, social events, and it just on and on and on. There's just a wide variety of different program types. And so how do we get to some consistency across sites, across programs, and how we're defining and labeling these programs and services? So this is basically trying to come up with some common language for dimensioning programs offered, as well as some buckets or types around dosage of programs or intensity, how often they're happening, and then the type of provider that's offering the program as well. And the resource gets more into that. And so basically we came up with these 7 program areas that are kind of broad categories of financial stability, health and wellness, housing stability, agency voice and community, youth development and education, internet connectivity, and individual support. That based on working with SAFE members, we understand that most of the programs offered will roll up into one of these program areas or impact areas. Next slide. So this is an example of what we have in the memo for one of these impact or program areas. Just to provide an illustrative example, this is our section around financial stability. And so in this section of the framework, we list, I think maybe about 10 programs that we think roll up or fall into this financial stability category. So we have, and I won't read the whole laundry list because you can read the list yourself. But basically, and for each of these, we also have a definition, an example definition that's attached to each of these programs. And how we came up with this list and these definitions is this was work over a few years of gathering from the SAFE members how they were defining their programs, talking with other partners like Ask and CSH around kind of how they defined and categorized programs, and really kind of trying to roll it all together and create like a nexus point among a lot of different organizations. And so, what we're trying to aim for here is to be inclusive of a variety of different programs that could be offered in affordable housing, but also thinking about trying to not create a list that's too long for service coordinators to actually be able to navigate the list, because our thinking is that if you have something in we're envisioning that this would go into a data system. So connecting back to what we had just talked about previously. So let's say a service coordinator is entering in a program type into your data system. If they're looking at a list that's like 30 different programs, it could be overwhelming for staff to have to navigate that list. They might just pick other because it's easier. They might pick something randomly. So really trying to strike that balance of having a list of programs that's inclusive of a variety of different program types that could be offered, but also, not being too overwhelming. Yeah, next slide. So how do you actually put this into practice? What are some use cases for this framework? We think that this is most applicable for organizations that are providing a range of different types of programs across a few different sites. If your organization is only specializing in a very particular program type or has a very small portfolio, it may not be as applicable to you. But if you have more than a handful of properties and you're starting to think about kind of systematizing some of that tracking, this could be helpful. It could be a blueprint for building out a system or trying to improve what you have. And just jumping ahead to the last bullet point, I just want to emphasize that this is a starting point that you can tailor to your organization. You can take this list and do with it what you want. You can adapt it, tweak it. It's not proprietary. It's really just intended to be a resource for folks to use as they want. And so, you could think about if it helps for tracking outcomes or impact across sites that offer similar programs. So like, you want to understand what outcomes look like for, all of your financial coaching programs that are offered across a variety of sites. So you can roll up all that information. For example, it could help perhaps with reporting to partners or funders around programs that are offered or outcomes across a range of sites. It could also potentially help with some logic model development as well. If you're thinking about, here are the outcomes we're trying to achieve around, say, like economic mobility, and then backing out from that, how do we think about the specific programs that will help to create the outcomes we're trying to achieve in our portfolio or for our residents. So I think may have gone a couple minutes over there. Sorry, Mina, but that's our two resources that we put in. There's the links again to both of these, and so we hope that they're helpful for folks. And I think next up is I'm going to kick it over to. Actually, I'll turn it back to you, Mina, so you can introduce our panelists. Sorry.
Thanks, Nicole. No, you're good. That was all really helpful, and I'm excited for the discussion we'll have after this with you and our other presenters as well. So we also wanted to now, like Nicole mentioned, transition to hear from 3 core certified organizations about their use of data systems to support resident services. So first, we will hear from Abby Myers-Basuni, the Data Analytics Manager at True Ground Housing Partners, and the use of Apricot 360. And then we will be hearing from Brian Wilson, the Community Impact Data Manager at POA Communities, about their use of Salesforce. And then finally, we're going to be hearing from Selena DeVivier, the Operations Manager for Community Outreach and Impact at National Housing Trust, and their experiences they've gone through the process of actually implementing a new resident services data system in the past year. So thank you all again for joining us, and I will now pass things off to Abby to kick us off.
Thanks, Mina. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Again, I'm Abby Myers-Basuni, Data Analytics Manager for True Ground, and we implemented Apricot 360 in 2021. And Mina, you can go ahead to the next slide if you want. So we've been building this out for a couple of years now, but to just give you a little bit of context about who we are, what we use our system for, et cetera. So True Ground Housing Partners, we were formed formerly known as APA, if you recognize that name. We have rebranded as of a few months ago. If you hear me mess up and say our previous name, please forgive me. We are True Ground now. But we are an affordable housing developer serving the Washington, D.C. region. Currently, we have around 2,800 units in our portfolio, home to more than 5,700 residents. Part of our current strategic goals is to increase that unit number to 7,500 in the next couple of years. So we have been growing quite a lot in the last few years, and we'll be doing quite a lot more. But part of what that has pushed us to do is to scale our systems along with our scaling staff and our scaling number of residents. We do serve, vast majority are low income, either very low income or extremely low income residents, making 60% area median income or below. As part of our commitment to supporting those residents, we provide on-site resident services coordination and programming. In fact, most of our properties have an office on-site where there is a coordinator stationed. And for those that don't have an on-site office, we still make sure that they are receiving programming, communications, etc., from resident services. Our resident services program became core certified in 2022, and actually, as part of that process, we adopted Apricot 360 CRM. I do believe in large part because it was one of the systems recommended by SAHF in that 2020 memo. So thank you all so very much. And that is the system that we're continuing to use to this day. Next slide. So again, just to give a little bit of context for where we're at, because I know 25% of y'all are also using Apricot, and our system may not look nearly as sophisticated as some of y'all's. I would say that we're constantly building and improving upon this plane as we're flying it. But essentially to just give you an idea of our history and where we are. So implementation wrapped up in late 2021, early 2022. For us, that implementation happened without someone sitting in my current position, right? So I joined the team after the system was getting implemented. What I found was that we had a lot of data quality issues underlying that we needed to solve, right? So spent the better part of a year and some change doing a lot of data cleaning, deduplication, just getting that underlying database to be accurate and work for our coordinators. From there, we spent a lot of time doing process improvement. So sometimes that was just establishing standard operating procedures and how-tos, as well as standardizing an onboarding process so that each time we're a growing team, and each time we get somebody new on board, we want to make sure they're all getting the same information. As part of this, we did attempt to establish some automation by connecting via API to RealPage's one site. At the time, that was the only property management software we needed to connect to. Unfortunately, after a year of back and forth, the project ended in failure, and our only recourses involved paying quite a lot of money to have a third party come in and help us. So we did abandon that. All of our data is currently getting moved manually from one place to the other. So again, not necessarily the most sophisticated system that is technically possible with Apricot, but that's what we have found to be just the simplest solution. And now in our current phases, we're really, again, just trying to do more and more and scale with our growing organization. So last year, we established a resident services matrix. I believe it's 34 metrics and counting across all of our properties. And the primary data source for most of that information is Apricot 360. We've now fallen into a quarterly reporting cycle. So again, we're just kind of continuously trying to make sure that we have quality assurance and we're optimizing processes, et cetera. For instance, we had two major forms that all of our coordinators were using in 2023, and previously we streamlined that into one so that 2025 moving forward, they'll be able to go to one place to do the same record keeping. So again, constantly improving as we go. Next slide. Last piece of context before I give you just a small peek under the hood. Again, for us, what our data and reporting systems look like, we're pulling in information from several different sources to put into Apricot. From there, our coordinators are essentially collecting and managing their own data from there, right? So we will take from our property management systems, okay, each month, who's moving in, what is their move-in date, contact information, who's on the lease, who else is living in the unit, etc. We'll pull that into Apricot, but then we want to get more information than that, right? So now we're asking about demographics, about, what support systems or benefits they're already receiving, what they might be eligible for or need. And so we're adding to that database through, again, Apricot 360. For us, we haven't used very many of the reporting features that are built in, and I'll talk a lot more about why in just a couple slides here. But for us, we're taking everything out of Apricot in order to tabulate it, visualize it, make it pretty, make it digestible. And primarily, places we're doing that are Excel, PowerPoint, and we've been piloting some Tableau dashboards. So again, early stages with that, but for us, the reporting mechanisms in Apricot have not met our needs, hence the need to move out of the system. Next slide. Okay, so again, a quick peek under the hood. So for us, the database features that have really made a difference, first and foremost, I would say the platform was made with social services and nonprofit organizations in mind. So I am a previous Salesforce user, for instance, when I was working for a for-profit organization. I'm familiar with that world as well. It does make a difference. I would say that, sure, the support folks aren't frontline, social services workers themselves, but they understand the language. They understand that the needs are a little bit different, right? And many of the features that are in the program stemmed from a need that came directly from the field, right? So again, there's good and bad to that, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but it does help, especially when it comes to onboarding new staff members and just, a really solid grasp of the basics. It does help that they're coming from that lens. And again, those basics, I would say, are pretty easy. The learning curve for just getting in the system and doing the most basic things that we need our coordinators to do, we've had good success. We have a very diverse and, again, growing team. We're more than 20 people large now. And from all ages and stages, all types of backgrounds when it comes to data entry and in technology, et cetera. We found good success, I would say, in getting people onboarded, with really just one session and then moving forward, using it day to day. It really is an ideal system if you're coming from a no to low code background. So one of the best parts about it, I would say, is there is a lot of customization in terms of you can build the forms exactly how you want it. You can customize your search. You can add special permissions, secure fields. The reporting can also be pretty drag and drop, easy to do. That said, what you kind of lose with some of that ability to, again, easy drag and drop, easy build a report, or easy build a form is, okay, I can't change the look of it. I can't do anything to optimize it, right? I have to work within the limitations that the system gives. So it's great if you are looking for something where you don't need any coding background. This is fantastic. But again, there's some trade-offs to that if you are looking for something a little more sophisticated. There are also simple important export tools, which I have found to be really, really helpful as an administrator. And again, because we take our data out of Apricot in order to visualize it, that has all been pretty smooth. There's also batch record creation available. So if our coordinators, for instance, are doing the same outreach, the same set of phone calls to 30 different residents, they can make one note that gets saved across all of them, right? And that has been a huge help as well in our note taking. There is a secure internal referral system available. We personally have not used it, in large part because the organizations that we're referring to are not on the Apricot system, and that's really the big benefit is if some other organization you work with is on Apricot, you can then easily and securely send resident information directly from there. For us, that hasn't been a helpful feature, but again, it is there. One kind of good bad thing is the system's completely cloud-based. So we don't have, a backup if, say, like this morning, they're having site-wide issues and I'm getting emails about, hey, from my coordinators, hey, I can't get in and do anything, right? So again, it's good in some ways. It's easy to access, right, from anywhere. But when the system's down, and unless you've got, exported files that you've saved elsewhere, that can be an issue. And I think, as Nicole mentioned, and as the memo mentions, it can be configured to be HIPAA compliant. Again, for us, that wasn't a necessity, but it's something that we always try to keep an eye on because we are very concerned with security. And if that ever is a necessity, we do know that we can do that within the system. Next slide. Okay, so for us, what we track, we really use Apricot mostly as a CRM, truly. So we are interested in tracking who are the residents, right? What household are they associated with? What unit are they associated with? Details like their contact info, demographics. And then we also get a little bit deeper, right? So we will conduct, for instance, welcome surveys with all new households moving in, and that survey includes a lot of questions about things like, hey, all right, what's the primary language that is spoken in your household? Hey, what services or what programs and events are you most interested in? What essentially starting that relationship and getting to know people's needs. So we collect a lot of that data, all of which is saved into Apricot. We also track our resident services events and programs in the system. So that includes both registration and attendance. I will give the caveat that we often will do like if it's a big event, we usually use another system for registration and then import the results. So, there's some technical capability, but again, for us, it hasn't really been useful. Occasionally, we will do like a pre or post survey that's also saved within those records. And then finally, volunteer requests, we also track through that system. Really, for us, all of this is tallied up into our 34 different metrics, but one of them being we really want to understand how our residents are interacting with resident services. So whether it's by age and stage, location, need, whatever, are there different ways in which they are communicating with us? Is it in-person events versus phone calls versus, all of those sorts of details? That's what we're really interested in and what we're using so much of this data to pull into to say, okay, who is using resident services and why, and how can we capitalize on that? Next slide. So talk about limitations, and the first thing I'm going to call out is my screenshots, as you can see here, are pretty simple, and I tried so hard to get better screenshots, and I was failing to. So maybe this is a me thing, but for me, the user interface, the actual like physical layout of the system, again, not super customizable. You can customize which fields are showing up. You can't customize what it looks like. So you can even see like I have, I would say a normal number of fields in this table, and it's running off the side. You can't even see the full thing in the screen. That's what a lot of these look like. They're a little bit clunky, but again, it works for the most part. And for us, those very, very basic features, right, of yes, build me a table, build me a form, and let me do a lot of customization within there, great. Anything when it comes to creating a dashboard or a report or things of that nature, we've had a lot more limited success. Again, I know it's possible. I've seen some really great examples out there. We've had our advanced support consultants help us set some things up too. But what we found is that we couldn't maintain them, right? So it didn't end up being the benefit that we were looking for. And again, there are other advanced features in here too, which I'm not covering because we don't use them. There is again, technically the option to do things like inventory management or a workflow or put up automated tickler responses and things like that. There, in our experience, when we've gone to try and implement them, we've hit like one or two major limitations that were like, this feature doesn't work for us the way we need it to. So again, for us, very, very limited, but there are more advanced features available, and depending on exactly what you're trying to accomplish, could work for other organizations. And I think that brings me to the end of my time, but please, by all means, any questions that anybody has, I've included my email address on here as well if anyone wants to follow up or connect after. So thank you all.
Thanks, Abby. I think we're gonna pass it off to Brian to talk a bit about Salesforce, but if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll hope to have some time for questions at the end as well.
Right. My good to go?
Good to go.
All right. So hi everyone. My name is Brian Wilson. I'm the Community Impact Data Manager at POA Communities, which is a part of POA Inc. I'm also the Salesforce administrator for our company. And today I'm going to dive into Salesforce with you all. Just for kind of a snapshot of how I'm planning to do this presentation, plan to go over what is Salesforce, why it's so popular. I plan to go over who we are at POA and how we use Salesforce. I do want you guys to have a picture of what Salesforce looks like. If I know a bunch of you have used it, but for those that haven't. So coming out of this presentation, I want you to have an understanding of what Salesforce looks like and how it works, how they store data, how they pull visualizations and report on that data. And then finally, we'll go over some pros and cons of the platform to see if Salesforce may or may not be right for you. So we can push to the next slide. Okay, so what is Salesforce? Salesforce it's a customer relationship management platform, and that's a big fancy word to basically say it's like a special toolbox for big or small businesses. It has, in simple terms, Salesforce is basically a supercharged customer organizer. It helps businesses keep their customers or residents happy and coming back for more. So a win for both parties. You can push right to the next slide. Wanted to kind of we're going to go over pros and cons at the end, but I did want to kind of talk about why it's so popular, because Salesforce is obviously such a known entity in the space. And I think it comes from its user-friendly interface and customizable features, along with the app exchange, which we'll talk about. You can basically customize everything you see in Salesforce. And I think that's a big draw to people because different businesses have such different needs. It's really easy for users to get in there and do what they have to do. We work with resident services coordinators, and they work with residents all day. The last thing they're going to want to have to do is spend a lot of time learning some really difficult system. So it is easy for them to get in there and do what they have to do. And then, there's great automation. They're first and foremost like a tech company. So they are always implementing the latest and greatest technology. And they have an app exchange. So the app exchange, which we will definitely talk more about in the pros and cons section at the end of the report, it's probably my favorite part of Salesforce. You can think of that like if you have an iPhone and iPhone comes with a certain amount of apps, but you go to the App Store when you don't have on the iPhone what you need. And so you can download third-party applications and easily integrate them into Salesforce to basically solve for any need that you might have. All right, yeah, you can push to the next slide. All right, so for context, POAC, the Preservation of Affordable Housing, it's a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and creating affordable rental housing. We're headquartered in Boston. We own and operate 13,000 affordable homes across the US, focusing on and providing stable, high-quality housing for low to moderate income individuals and families, with a commitment on community impact. So we integrate resident services to support economic mobility, health, and well-being for its residents, which brings us back to Salesforce and how we use it. Salesforce is our primary data tracking system for POA resource centers. So for us, we track progress towards our goals, which are keeping residents stably housed, making sure residents have the tools they need for financial independence through coaching and evidence-based programs and community engagement. So we track all those things, whether it be, referrals, goals, and the progress towards those goals, and different coaching notes, programs we put on. We store all that data in Salesforce, and it's super helpful for us too, because a lot of times, when it comes to grant funding or advocating on behalf of POA to different local governments for subsidies, you want that data to show the impact that you're having on residents' lives. So we can move to the next slide here. So this is where I want to talk about, I want you guys to kind of understand what Salesforce looks like. When you log into Sales, and there will be a better picture right after this slide, we'll get there. But when you log in, you have the navigation at the top. It's a bar, and it has, on the top right, you have this kind of a snapshot of that bar. Snapshot of the bar, you have different things, objects you can click on. You basically select it, and it opens up a view of it. You also have a search bar, just a regular old search bar. You can search for any kind of, keyword you might be looking for. Start typing it in, it will start to autofill like on Google and show you all the related stuff in your database. And then the app exchange is the hamburger icon that's always in the top left of the platform. This is where you can switch between different Salesforce apps that you have. Like, for example, for us, we have many instances of Salesforce. We have one for Hawthorne, which is a housing unit that we own. We also have one for WRC, Boston Choice. And so you can switch between those apps, and and the different users that are specific to that site will have only that app, but that's how you would switch between them. Moving to the next slide. This is a much better picture of what Salesforce would look like when you log in. When you log in, you will be looking at a homepage. A homepage is basically it's where you put the dashboard that kind of represents that Salesforce instance. So for example, a second ago, I talked about Hawthorne or the WRC. The dashboard, this is just a generic dashboard to kind of illustrate the point, but it would showcase like all of the metrics and stats and visualizations about that site right here, right when you log in on the homepage. It's the farthest to the left object. And so it's great. The homepage, and the dashboards, they, real-time data visualizations, they update. You just click refresh and it updates. Great to track performance and metrics right there. And so that's the homepage. Going to move and dashboards. We're going to talk more about dashboards and how this data does get comprised, but this is what the visualizations would look like. You can see these blue hyperlinks underneath each visual, and that is the reports that power the visual. And we'll get more into reports in a second, but I think next I want to just talk a little bit about objects and how that works. So objects, next slide. So objects, for us, we have like 6 primary ones at the top across those bars. When you click into them, you can think of these objects as basically little containers. They're like buckets. They store information. And for us, they're all related to residents, but in different ways. So accounts are basically the household level information of a resident. Individuals are obviously the resident themselves. Any coaching notes associated to the resident, referrals, programs, all these things, they are all specific information to that resident. So, we track it across these different objects. They are connected. And this way we can track like multi-levels of a resident's journey with us. So if you move down a slide, I think it should be what happens when you click into those objects. When you click into any of the objects, this one's called contacts, which is our individuals, if we just renamed it. But they're all, most of them are the same in terms of what happens when you click into it. The top left picture is what it looks like when you click into an object. It shows a list view. It's like a very Excel looking columns and rows. You can search for different people in the search box. You can create new contacts. You can send emails from here. You can change the list view. Right now it's just all contacts, but it could be like only certain contacts at a certain property. You can also totally customize this view. I'm going to continue to talk about how customizable the platform is, because it really is. Everything you see here, I mean, we do list views like this. We like that way, but it is customizable. What you're going to see here, when you click into a record, is what the bottom picture looks like. Now, this is all the details of that individual record. It's, just obviously fake data, Mr. Fred Flintstone, but it gives you all the details of what that person and his, relationship to POA. So we have employment information, demographic information, financial information, and it's also connected to the other objects. For us, you can't click on it because it's just a picture, but you see the related tab next to details. That's where you can click and it will connect you to his coaching notes specifically, or his, programs that he's involved in. And so that way you can actually see on an individual level and track his journey pretty granularly. So moving to the next slide. Okay. So yeah, before we jump into reports, we just want to kind of, we are blitzing through a lot of high level information. But the homepage where we visualize data, the objects, the buckets where we store the data, the reports are where we're going to pull the data. So with reports, you have, when you click reports, it's going to look like this, where you have all these folders of different reports. You can see there's a button that says new reports. You would click the reports and it would basically open up a report builder where you can select different columns to put in, and you're building out more of an Excel-like report. This is the bridge between how Salesforce stores its data into like a more Excel columns and rows type format, because it's not natively how Salesforce is storing its data. If you, and Mina, this is where I wanted you to skip, I think, to the next one and then the next one and then come back one. So, okay, perfect. So I just wanted to show this first before we talk about different reports, and just focus on the top left one. It's much more digestible. The columns in the left-hand side, you can just specify the kind of columns you want to put in. You see they just come in more or less like an Excel report. That's a tabular report. And then the other images here are just the different types of reports that are the different types of common reports, I should say, that if you wanted to get fancy with your reporting, you could. Whereas the top right is a summary report. This is where you group by row. And so you could put in like, I don't know, billing state, and it would start to group that way. Matrix reports are bottom left, where you group by columns and rows. And then a joined report at the bottom right is how you would, it's basically just two tabular reports side by side. So you can see here, this is like an opportunities closed one versus closed, and that way you can compare them. That's not used as much. And now go back up one slide. So yeah, this is just like a more like easy to digest, like what are the different reports? How do you use them? And what are the pros and cons of each? For the most part, tabular reports are pretty standard, if not a summary report to just get the like a row level summary of some column. But these reports that you were just looking at a second ago are how those visualizations are made. You make the visualizations off of the reports. So the data stored in the objects, you pull the data from the objects into reports, you make the visualizations off the reports. And that's kind of like the cycle of how that works. And now we can jump down 2 slides from here. All right. So that was wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of what Salesforce looks like, what it can offer, or how it works. Because I did find it to be pretty different than other data management platforms that I've worked with. But now I want to talk to you guys about some advantages and maybe disadvantages of Salesforce. Coming into POA, I actually had no Salesforce experience. So this whole year I've been getting really up to snuff on, and I'm about to take my Salesforce administrator exam very, very soon. So I feel like I have a great lens into what was good and what was challenging when it comes to Salesforce. So with the pros, reiterating a lot of what I've already said, it has a lot of robust object management tools, highly customizable and scalable. If you're a very large business, if you're a very small business, this platform can easily handle any amount of data that you have, and it can scale with it. There's so much customization you can do. There's Apex code, different Lightning components. If you have developers that know Salesforce, then there's just a lot of automation, workflows, process builders that you can make that can just make things really easy. And there's a vast ecosystem of integrations. That App Exchange is my favorite part of Salesforce. We use it in a couple of ways, like we connect Yardi, a different software, into Salesforce using Apsona. It's a third-party integration. We have a third-party data backup system. Salesforce has their own backup, but we had a specific need, so we found, and these third-party apps are oftentimes like their own company. They're not just like some like, oh, confusing thing that I need to figure out how to implement. They actually have their own sales teams and customer support groups. So not only are you getting a third-party app, you're getting like full support with them oftentimes. So it's really handy. They also have they're cloud-based. You can connect anywhere, and they have a mobile app. They have strong analytics and reporting, and they're continuously innovating and updating. Like I said before, they're basically like a cutting-edge tech company. They have, they're always implementing the latest and greatest technologies. And then one more down for the disadvantages. Okay, so talked a lot about why it's so great. Why is it not so great? Definitely one of the more costly platforms. It is definitely expensive. And so if cost is a consideration, licensing fees, they can be expensive. So it is definitely something to look into and consider. They have different pricing packages, so they have some flexibility there, but I think cost is definitely a challenge to consider. And then learning curve and maintenance overhead. Now, like I said before, it is easy for the users to use it. It is not so easy for someone like me to use it, the administrator. I would suggest that if you were going to use Salesforce, to have like an administrator or someone trying to become an administrator on staff, because it is complicated on the back end to connect objects, to fix things. There's a lot of maintenance. Any data tool, if it's been made, it's gonna need updating or maintenance or configuration changes. And so it is just good to know ahead of time that if you're thinking about Salesforce, there is, either plan to train someone to be an administrator or hire one, because it is definitely, I think it's a must. I think it's a necessity. We've hired like consultants in the past before I started here, and now I've kind of taken it on full times, and it's definitely challenging if you don't know what you're doing. There is a lot of resources outlined to learn, though, if someone is interested in learning. And then the final challenge to consider is potential lock-in. As things get heavily customized, you have these workflows, the automations, you have all these reports, you get very ingrained into Salesforce. It could become hard to migrate out of Salesforce once you've been in there for a really long time. So it's just another thing to consider as you're choosing your platform. And one more slide. That's right. Advice for maximizing. If you are going to go Salesforce, this is my advice as someone that's been in it almost every day for the last year. Regular training for whoever's your administrator or person kind of like helming the Salesforce. Lots of free resources. They're called trailheads. They're online. They're free. They're great. They teach you everything you need to know. I highly recommend them. Cleaning your data regularly. Data, it can get messy, and duplicate data, making sure things match on the back end. I would highly recommend cleaning data regularly. automating things that can be automated. The workflow and process builders of Salesforce is really great, and the less manual intervention in any kind of process, the less often that you'll find human error. So I do recommend using automation and stay current. They're, like I said before, they're really always updating Salesforce. They have a great community, and so their new features they come out with oftentimes make things easier for you. And so you do need to learn a new thing, but it's oftentimes worth it. And that's my presentation. I think the next slide is it. Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. That was a really helpful peek into Salesforce and some of the benefits and limitations.
Yeah.
Now we want to transition to Selena, who is going to talk, also uses Salesforce, I should say. But unlike Brian and Poa, who have been using Salesforce for a number of years, Selena at NHT recently transitioned to Salesforce. So she's going to talk a bit more about what that process is actually like of transitioning into a new data system. And I think this could be Salesforce, but also more broadly, what organizations should be thinking about and considering.
Thank you, Mina. Hi, everyone. I'm Selena DeVivier. I'm the operations manager for our Community Outreach and Impact team at National Housing Trust. Community Outreach and Impact is kind of a long name, so you'll likely hear me refer to it as COI. Same with National Housing Trust. I'll call it NHT, but y'all are all from affordable housing, so you're familiar with the alphabet soup that we live in. But at NHT, our mission is to create and preserve affordable homes to provide opportunity, advance racial equity, reduce economic disparities, and strengthen community through practice and policy. And we're truly doing that by bringing a level of expertise across a variety of areas, right? We bring resident services, lending, policy, sustainability, and development all under one roof to ensure that everyone everywhere is proud of where they live. And so I'm really going to focus on COI, Community Outreach and Impact. But what led to us figuring out what platform we were going to use necessitated one team trying something that would work for everyone. And because we each have such different expertise or just such different priorities within our departments, I think it's important to provide that context that we do a little bit of everything. So in terms of the portfolio that we serve, if we can go next slide, Mina. NHT has over 33 properties in our portfolio, primarily in the Mid-Atlantic region. The largest concentration is in DC. Our team, the Community Outreach and Impact team, is active at 14 communities. So that's approximately 1,770 households, again, across the DC, Maryland, Virginia region, so across the DMV. We have, give or take, a little over 3,700 residents and 6 full-time site staff. So 6 full-time resident service coordinators who are across our 14 communities. I provide this overview to give just a bit of context of like where we were at the start of this process. So first of all, we're relatively small compared to folks like POA. We have a pretty tiny portfolio. But before Salesforce, a lot of our tracking was done through a combination of Excel spreadsheets, SharePoint list. We would have like paper surveys out somewhere and then paper sign-in sheets somewhere else. We described everything as a program, and much of our impact data was based on participation rates. So how many people showed up to the event? That's really limited. And we were finding that a lot of the conversations we were having both internally with our board, with our other departments, and externally with funders was that we weren't able to give more robust data on the immense impact we were having on our communities. Since we've switched to Salesforce, we've now defined our work by program initiatives, then programs and services. So getting really granular or as high level as we need to be based on our audience. So we were able to standardize our language based on the audience that we were talking to. We're also redefining our impact indicators to ensure we're both tracking the volume of residents served and growth as a result of engagement. Because data is super important. I mean, we can talk data all day long, but truly the thing that we're doing is serving our communities. And we want to ensure that we're not only doing that in a way that is closing the loop, it's actually getting folks the support that they're looking for, but that we're also setting up our site staff to do their job as best as possible. So most importantly, we've been able to drive home the importance of that work for our site staff. And I feel like that's been my 2024 win of the year is our site staff. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but our site staff has been really vocal about both what Salesforce has done for them, but more importantly, their desire to have tools that show real-time impact. And Salesforce has been able to do that. I mean, Excel sheets are all at least for us, the way we were using them, were retroactive. You have your monthly report documenting who was where, and at the end of the year, we're able to say what our overall annual impact was. And that just wasn't enough for some of our site staff. They wanted to be able to see both what they were doing at a larger community level and then how to track their specific engagements with individuals. But what were those considerations? How did we get here? What did we have to keep in mind when we were transitioning to Salesforce? And so first and foremost, we at NHG, take one step back. We had a lot of considerations, and a lot of these are going to echo those that have already been compiled in the overview of the commonly used data systems that SAHF put out. So I can't push enough to like reference that document in addition to these considerations, but they're definitely going to reiterate the importance of some of these pieces. And this is what really impacted us. The first thing that we found as we were going through this process was that we needed to better define what impact meant to us. And we learned through the build out phase of Salesforce that we had a lot of process gaps, particularly in how we discussed our work. Within COI, it just made sense to us what we did, and we were talking about it all the time. But then when we were talking to someone, I don't know, Energy Solutions, and we were talking about specific digital equity work or resident leadership trauma and healing, they had no idea. It was like two different languages, right? No idea what we were talking about. And so we were able to spend the time not only understanding what Salesforce could do for us, which in short is everything. I think Brian really drove home how customizable it is. If you can put your mind to it, Salesforce can probably do it. And it just allowed us to spend the time to strategize around the growth of our department. I think Abby spoke to it really well at TrueGround, which is that our services team is growing by a lot. I mean, our organization by itself has doubled its staff within the last 2 years. Our COI team has also been growing. How we do the work is evolving. So we needed a system that evolved with how we were defining our impact. And again, we defined everything as a program. Digital skills training or digital literacy courses, program. After school services, program. Food pantry, program. And then when we're talking about our larger sort of initiatives like access to technology and digital skills, program. I mean, it was really difficult to sort of differentiate what the important levels were amongst the work that we were doing. And so we were able to break that down to be able to better describe that. And most importantly, throughout that build out process, we brought our site staff into the design process. And I actually was just talking to our resident services coordinators about this, and one of them noted being able to have a seat at that table to be able to inform what the final product would look like made all the difference. It really solidified their buy-in into the system, recognizing that we're not just building something to collect data and they were just expected to use it, but we were really valuing what their input is and would be. Outside of defining the impact, internal processes is what we realized also needed to morph in this transition. While we were building out new systems, that also meant that we needed to match our internal policies and processes to those new systems. So beforehand, we had monthly reports through Excel spreadsheets. Now we needed to figure out what the reporting expectation in Salesforce was for our site staff and what was feasible, what could they do. We also found that this was a great time to audit our data integrity, because as you're building out Salesforce and you start to put things into Salesforce, you know, if you put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. And so you really wanted to spend the time cleaning up data and what that looks like for your staff. For me, a big 2025 priority is going to be building something called a data warehouse. that connects our data management software or property management software to Salesforce, so that we're not manually inputting data into Salesforce anymore. At NHT, we use third-party property management, and we use a variety of companies, and they each use their own specific data management software. And because there's just so much inconsistency across those processes, it's just how that company uses it. We wouldn't want the platform to speak directly to Salesforce. So we're using something called the data warehouse to map it out and then put it in the way that we want to. But it took us time to use the platform to understand that. Because beforehand, again, we were just receiving reports either in a PDF or in Excel or just through conversation with site staff. In that realm, speaking of something Brian talked about, staff capacity is definitely something you want to consider. Really ask yourself who's going to support rollout, who's going to lead training and continuous training, and who's providing the day-to-day support to your site staff or just your staff in general. Similarly to Brian, I'm going through a system administrative exam. I'm taking my exam in January, so wish me luck, send me all of your good vibes. But truly, this is a platform that is going to grow with your team. I'm in Salesforce on a daily basis, maybe an hourly basis, constantly just reiterating and making sure that things are accessible for our team. We have like a 30-page Salesforce user guide that was developed for our site staff to use. All of those things need to be constantly updated and maintained in order to make the platform relevant. Staff training is definitely an additional consideration. Again, the system is only as good if your staff knows how to use it and if it feels like it's for them. One of our RSCs described it as practice makes permanent, which is that as we were training and like rolling folks into the platform, they just needed daily interactions, no matter how small it was. Logging in, pulling a report, logging in, looking at a dashboard, adding a new contact, moving a phone number, and then re-adding it in. They needed constant reinforcement to learn the software and to buy into it, because if it's not your primary system, then it's just another task for the site staff to do on a long list of tasks that they have. So definitely want to consider that. And probably the question I get most often is timeline. How long did it take to implement? How long does it take you to train people? How often are site staff in it on a day-to-day basis? For us, our implementation period took about 18 months, and that includes build out, so learning Salesforce and like what an object is, training your staff on it, which took about 6 months, or our build out took about 6 months. Staff training took about 6 months, and that was with modules and like we had each coordinator get a fake resident, and like we built out profiles for them and they like followed along their path for 6 months, which was really helpful. And then 6 months of just like usage of rollout. We rolled out in October 1, 2023 was like our launch date. Those first 3 months were just like chaos and went by in a blur because it's also holiday season. So for my services folks, you probably knew how fun that was. And then the rest of the year was really just figuring it out, sort of driving the car as we were building the road, which for our team, because we're smaller, worked. I mean, we're constantly having to innovate and work things out within our day-to-day positions. So being able to just have something in place, build it to our needs, and then adjust as we saw fit, it just really worked out for us. So in terms of your timeline, set really realistic timeline goals and leave buffer for process development. I think something that has been most exciting for me as the operations manager coming out of Salesforce is just the opportunity to alleviate some of the pressure on staff. Things like seeking approval for service schedules, or documenting a pop-up conversation that they had with a resident. All of those things can be automated, but I wasn't thinking about those during build out. So now I get to take the time to actually build out what that looks like within the platform, create a process for it, and then ultimately alleviate some of that burden onto our site staff. So those are my transition considerations, but I think Nicole and Mina know best that I can talk about Salesforce all day long. So if folks want to follow up with me, want to have more conversations about it, or have any questions, I'm more than happy to address them.
Thank you, Selena. That was really helpful, both for Salesforce, thinking about Salesforce, but more broadly, like you said, those considerations when you're implementing and transitioning into a new data system. So now we want to spend some time for Q&A. So if you do have a question, please feel free to use that Q&A function and include your questions there. I will just check to make sure we don't have any current questions. And again, feel free, put your questions in there. I do want to sort of kick off with a question. Relating sort of what we've been talking about on program impact. And a few of you have talked about this already, but just how has your organization really evolved in its use of tracking and analyzing resident services data to understand service and program impact? And what has changed over the past few years? Selena, you've talked about this a bit already, but Brian, Abby would love to hear your thoughts as well on sort of how this has evolved for you.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. So they have been using Salesforce for quite a bit before I got there, but I've been able to see historically how things have changed, um, looking back, and then I can see, just since I've been here, what we've been changing, and so I kind of would categorize into like three. I would say three main points. So categorizing services effectively by aligning with like, you know, broad categories like housing stability, financial stability, health and wellness. So Selena talked about, I almost chuckled to myself talking about like programs and how they're all just programs, but they're so different. Having more like subcategories, like outcome areas, sub outcome areas, that really helps us, categorize services more effectively. And we've been implementing that a lot. Um, Focusing on impact and outcomes, so transitioning from simply tracking activities to measuring outcomes tied to resident goals has been key. And we have like a lot of like little increment measurements that we do. We call them like milestones or like steps. And so, for example, rather than just like logging attendance, we're focusing on how recurring programs like financial coaching or health initiatives led to measurable improvements on resident stability and wellness. And then overcoming data silos. So centralizing program and resident data has helped us identify like patterns, um, such as correlation between like program dosage, weekly financial coaching, and improved outcomes like reduced evictions, like something we're looking into. We haven't proved anything definitively on that aspect, but like that's something that we're moving towards. We're like trying to make that case because, we're trying to measure that impact. And so that's what comes to mind.
Really helpful. Thanks.
I'll add on to that. I feel like Brian and Selena both covered a lot of what came to mind for me, right? It is so much in our experience has been going from just how many people participated in this thing and can we even get an accurate count of that to now where we're looking at like, okay, well, what percentage of our folks that were filed on for eviction, what percentage of them did we get them off of that list, right? How many evictions did we prevent? What percentage of our folks are attending events and programs versus coming to us for individual assistance or service coordination, right? So we're moving past again, yeah, just like total number of participants to what were the actual outcomes. I think, again, we're midstream, I would say, in that process and getting more sophisticated each year. But for us, a big part of it, I think, has been like we do all of the resident services team really does so much stuff, and it goes across all of these different sectors, all of these, right? Exactly. I think the programs example is a fantastic one, right? Because we have that too. What is the difference between an event and a program? Depending on who you ask, they might have some very different answers for you, right? So just being able to capture all of it, right, and not missing pieces here and there, I think that has been part of our struggle, but also our big win, right, is to, okay, we've come out of that now with a 34 metric matrix that, you know, does compile all of this activity together in one place. So that's where we've moved to, again, constantly evolving though.
It's really helpful. Nicole, just curious from your work looking across the SAFE members, I have a feeling a lot of these trends are popping up as well, but would love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah. I was so appreciative of Brian, and Abby talking about programs and events. It ties back to the program classification framework that we talked about earlier, and trying to help organizations get to more of like granularity and consistency on like what is financial counseling versus financial coaching versus like this other program that we do that's similar, and like really trying to delineate, and trying to get to more kind of consistency on like what is attendance, what is participation, like, and really we had a lot of conversations among the SAFE members on thinking about, outcomes is of course super important, but it's a little bit of like a three-legged stool as well, of like understanding outcomes but also understanding these outputs, and like participation and and attendance like is also equally important, to understanding uptake. And then maybe the third leg of the stool being, the actual programs being offered and the staff that's doing it and the dosage. And so it's every piece of that stool is really important to, understanding kind of how the organization is operating. But I see that looks like we did get a question in the chat, Mina, so I don't know if I haven't had a chance to
Yeah.
look, but
Yeah, it looks like we have a question from Felicia. Saying that their organization made the choice to migrate to Caseworthy, another data system, but ran into some issues with the company being bought out and their talent leaving. So the system isn't as usable as they'd like it to be. And they were wondering if anyone has been able to successfully use Caseworthy that they might be able to connect with. Felicia, I'm happy to see if we know of any organizations that have used Caseworthy. I think we didn't include it explicitly in our data systems memo because we had not heard of many organizations that were using it, but happy to share any information we do have on that as well. I will say, what you mentioned that staff turnover at an organization or a data system software company can be a challenge. So maybe that is a question as well. Have folks encountered that? How do you navigate that when maybe there's turnover or just over time, you lose information, things and processes you've put into place to sort of combat that? I'll just open that up to the group.
I haven't worked with Caseworthy specifically, but I can talk a little bit about how it felt for me coming on to POA almost a year ago now, and like was mentioned, they've had Salesforce for years, and it's been passed around 4 different times. We had 2 different consultants. We had an old colleague, Lauren, who was the primary Salesforce data person, and I really hope I get to meet her one day because she's a godsend. She really documented everything she did. There's so many resources that we have in like shared team files and folders that really helped me understand like what has been done, like what were they working on, challenges that she's faced. She has like all these videos she's made. So, I mean, it kind of got me thinking about like, the importance of documentation. And I think was it Selena or someone mentioned that they have like a 28 or like large manual for their platform, and I think like stuff like that is so helpful, not just for now, but like just going forward. So I would highly recommend documentation as much as you can.
Yeah, the idea of us losing information, particularly resident data, like keeps me up at night. So like this is like something that I spend an embarrassing amount of time on within my role. Um, but it really is just like driving home the importance of documenting outside of your like immediate space, right? I think within community services in general is a paper industry. So the fact that a lot of these data systems are transitioning to cloud-based is going to be a transition regardless. And it's getting staff comfortable with like using it and like sharing information with people in their team. Um, and that is truly what I have found has been maybe one of the largest difficulties in rolling any new process out is I feel confident that our staff or our team, I should say, understands the concepts of it, but then them implementing it and sharing their progress along the way can get really difficult. And so it's really keeping that in mind and making sure that, again, processes are designed with your site staff in mind, with your team in mind. And bringing along our coordinators into this process has been really helpful because then getting that buy-in ensures that it's something that they can pick up and effectively use and not just be told to do. And then I can sleep a little better at night.
Agreed wholeheartedly with Selena and Brian. The only thing I'll add is sometimes it's turnover not within your own company, right, but within your vendor. And as Felicia's experienced, right, I've unfortunately gotten a lot of heartburn from some of our platforms, including, if I'm just being completely transparent, including Apricot. So they have what's called the Advanced Support Consultant program. We pay extra to have someone who is specialized. You know, they have whatever it is, internal certifications for, you know, all of the super cool back end stuff, and they have a set number of hours to help us with things. We've seen a ton of turnover in that position. And so every time I start to feel like, okay, we can get a project going with this person, now somebody new is here and we have to transition, you know, so I definitely feel that, not related to resident services, but like in a different department, we had something similar happen with one of our asset management software platforms where, you know, they talk a big game and then you get in there and you actually try to do the things they told you they could do, and what do you know, it doesn't work, and if you want it fixed you got to pay a lot more money, right? So absolutely been there. And I would say I over time, what I have come to value so much, from Bonterra, honestly, and also like some of our other new software vendors, is when the support team, at the very least, like has some basic idea what affordable housing is, what we do, what is resident services, why is it important, right? It can help, and that it shouldn't be that way, right? That you're dependent upon to a certain degree the people that you're getting connected with that in the organization, but it is part of the reality, right? So I would definitely say be your own advocate in all of these conversations. I cannot say enough about like take your time when selecting software systems. Do all of the research, ask all of the reference questions, because these things can make or break. I mean, as we can see with, you know, our colleague Felicia here, right? It can totally make or break your experience on a platform. So, and you can't control it, right? Once you're in, you're in. So definitely, I would say prevention as much as possible on that front.
Definitely. That sounds like a universal thing a lot of folks are experiencing and have to navigate. So Felicia is not alone in that. Um, we have just 2 more minutes, so maybe we can end just briefly. Would love to hear maybe one opportunity you see for the future of this work with your data systems and tracking, or goal you have going into the future.
I'll cheat a little because I already talked about it. But the data warehouse, I think, is going to make a really big difference for our team. Right now, the process that we have to get resident data into Salesforce is property management lets the coordinator know someone has moved in, or that resident comes to the coordinators like, hey, this is me. I would like services. And then our coordinator is like, great. And they act like everything's fine. But then like internally, they're going through all the gears of, okay, now I have to meet with the manager. I have to get this report. I got to get the rent roll. I got to do an assessment. All these other things take place. And then we get the rent roll and maybe not all the information's filled out. 8 out of 10 times, it's not all filled out. So now the coordinator has to present those questions in their assessment and like have that set up. And that's really time consuming. Like that's just like me talking about that took too much time. And so I think the data warehouse is going to help us alleviate a lot of that pressure where once that information is inputted into the data management software, which if they're living in a unit, it should be, it'll automatically go into Salesforce, and then our coordinator will just get automatically pinged that they have a new resident who they can either reach out, provide a one page or two, or it can like set up an appointment to do an assessment with them. But I think it helps us have more immediate touch points that are relevant to the residents' needs.
For us, I would say some short-term goals have involved, again, we're sort of process optimizing right now. And so part of it is getting some of our staff members on the team, especially like associate director levels, manager levels, more familiar with sort of the back end, you know, a little bit more advanced pieces to the software. So that for us, that's been an immediate term goal. Longer term, I definitely see us moving towards a data warehouse. So Selena, I may be hitting you up for advice in the future, but what we have found is that our data systems are so siloed right now and imperfect in so many ways that we need to get that foundation really, really strong before we're ready to pull it together. That's kind of where we're at right now. But in the future, that's what I hope for us as well, is some automation, some, you know, a single source of truth for all of this, and that it's not just for resident services, but our full organization.
Yeah, our company's also talking about data warehouses. That's pretty funny. All three of us should meet and talk about data warehouses. But in terms of Salesforce, what we have on the horizon, we are trying to do a little bit of a program redesign. You know, like we talked about many times here, it's I feel like it needs to be more granular. What is a program? And there's actually some pretty cool packages that Salesforce has, a nonprofit program package specifically, that really breaks out instead of being in one object across like 5 objects, the different aspects of program delivery services. And so looking into that, and then also tracking dollars spent from like partners and down from the top all the way down to the individuals, so that we can see, we can track how the money is moving more effectively.
That's great. That's a lot to think about. Wish you all the best in your future plans for 2025 and the new year, and improving those data systems and processes. I know we're a few minutes over, so thank you for everyone for sticking with us. Thank you to our presenters and panelists. We really appreciate this, and I feel like this was very, very helpful and insightful into some of these data systems and tools and considerations as organizations are thinking about transitioning or starting to track data. So we do have some resources we've shared in the chat for our CORE's resource library, newsletter, if you'd like to hear about future webinars. We also have past webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. And if you ever have questions, please feel free to reach out at our email, cores@safenet.org. So thank you all so much. And again, make sure to check out those resources. We'll share those 2 tools that we've developed and Nicole talked about in follow-up to you all as well. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.